Hey guys, Ever here. And I got watches. I got cool watches. You guys have seen these watches on the Instagram because our friend, John Ferrer at Brew Watches sent us a couple of Brew Watches to play around with for a few weeks. You've probably at this point already heard our podcast with Jonathan, and if you haven't check it out. That will be coming out on Thursday, the 20th, I believe. So I don't know, timing wise, I'm not 100% sure. I think this will come out right after that. It's always a little weird to get going on these videos. You know, when we record the podcast, we've got a soundboard set up, and I bring in the music, and then Andrew does the intro, and then he says, "Everett, how are you?" And then I can talk, and I feel very comfortable with that. I'm much less comfortable with these cold starts. I have no music, so you've probably heard music, but that was piped in afterwards. So here we are. I've got a couple watches. These are the Brew Mastergraph, Brew's most recent selection, and the Brew Retrograph, which is the last that came out about a year before. So first, Brew Watches. What is Brew Watches? Brew Watches is a brand that was started in 2015, perhaps a little bit before that. I assume that the workings of Brew started in 2013 or 14, but it was announced in 2015 by way of Kickstarter with Brew's inaugural watch, which was very successful. Just an amazing square-cased chronograph that sort of got off the ground running fast. Later in 2016, Brew introduced its incredibly popular HP-1 watch, which is a more traditional three-hander. Again, just lovely, affordable, very well-received watch. This is a late 2018 that Brew introduced the Retrograph, which wasn't so much a change of direction, but just a natural evolution of Brew watches. I've got this in the Technicolor version. There are also some more. This is a sort of limited or at least sort of tweaked version. There's also some more traditionally colored and styled watches. And then just late last year, Brew introduced its Mastergraph, which is also a chronograph, but this one with a dive style bezel, So, like I said, we had John on the podcast this last week to discuss his watches, to discuss his brand, to discuss what he's done, his philosophies, where he's come from. John is a designer. He's a designer first and foremost, an industrial designer. So what that means is he he designs products for sale. He's got background in the watch industry, starting with an internship all the way back in college, and then he was professionally doing that. Ran into some just great, fantastic opportunities, and said, "You know what? I'm smart. I'm great at design. I can do this. I'm gonna do this as a project." And here we are, now 5 years later, and John has become one of the most revered designers in the watch industry, and he's making these very, very affordable pieces. So, what are these? These are both coffee timers. What? What does that mean? What's a coffee timer? These are espresso shot timers. And I asked John personally, kind of early on when we started talking to him, "Hey, John, is this tongue-in-cheek? Are you goofing around? Are you goofing us? Are you trolling us?" And no, I'm not. In fact, when I designed the Retrograph, he says, it was actually at the request of a barista, a professional business owner who said, "This is what we need. We have these terrible coffee timers. I need a good shot timer." And John says, "Well, I can do that." And I think the guy had originally asked for some kind of weird stuff. And John says, really what I need is I need to know how long my pull is taking. So I'm going to give a little register here at 30 to 35 seconds. So I can get that perfect shot. Now, an espresso shot takes anywhere from 25 to 35 seconds to get that perfect pull. But certainly at 30 seconds, Right as you get into that yellow, you know you're going to be great. Anything less than 25, you're going to be you're going to be underbrewed, perhaps a little bit sour. Anything over, you're going to be dark and bitter. So right in here is what we want. And again, I said, John, is this tongue in cheek? No, but what it is an actual useful complication. And certainly to the extent, well, I don't make espresso. Well, who cares? You also don't dive to, for hours at end, or do saturation diving, which requires a helium release valve. It's cool. It's useful. It's fun. If you're into coffee at all, it's a complication that actually could be meaningful in your life. So two watches. Before we talk about what's different, I think we should talk a little bit about what's the same, because these watches are very similar in a number of ways. Can you hear my family breaking down? We're coronavirus quarantining, so we not only have our kids here, we've got other kids because we have the opportunity to be home during the school day. So these are both 38 millimeter cases. They're both square tonas, and if you look at them from above, right, they look different. However, map them onto one another, and the case, the up and down profiles are nearly identical. So 38 millimeters is your case diameter minus the crowns, 41.4 millimeters and 41.5 millimeters on the lug to lug on these things. So very compact, very wearable. 22 millimeter lugs on both of them. VK68 on the Mastergraph, VK64, or perhaps that's vice versa. VK68, VK64. And the only difference, so those are both hybrid Mecha Quartz Seiko chronograph movements. So obviously a quartz caliber with a mechanical chronograph on top of it. Only difference is date or no date. So no date, 64, date, 68. Price very similar too, $350 and $375. What's different? Well, like as discussed, Retrograph came out late 2018, and this was sort of a new deal for John, right? His watches before this had been sort of simple, entry level, getting to know you models. This is where John's image really sort of jumps out at you. So first difference, obviously these dials. Where the Retrograph is pad printed, it is a sandwich dial, so we've got these sub dials that are step down. Everything's pad printed, right? So and we get it up here, we get it close, and it seems, gosh, that's fairly busy. However, you get it back, it's this very clean, simple, easy design. Now, this is the Technicolor version. This is my favorite. I think this is my favorite of all of John's watches. And it's just got this very funky 70s vibe, but big square crystal. Square-ish crystal, obviously rounded edges. Big square crystal. Flat sapphire. Did flat sapphire. Yeah, that crystal really fills the case. And so what it does is it makes it feel bigger. Makes it feel bigger on the wrist than the Mastergraph. The Mastergraph, again, 38 millimeters, but it's square, so it's got quite a bit of wrist presence. But a much smaller domed sapphire crystal. Both of these are, I think, 11.4. So not incredibly tall watches. Although they do have some healthy wrist presence. This big flat case back. Some healthy wrist presence. John talked on the podcast a little bit about how his design is constantly evolving. So when he came out with the Retrograph, and I'm sorry, these are shiny sides, and I just cannot keep the fingerprints off them. I'm sorry, guys. I'm a greasy turd. Hey, there I am. Hi. So the transition from the brushed to the polished surfaces here, just a straight line around, which no problem with straight lines. But when he designed the Mastergraph, he wanted to give us just a little bit more dimension. So all of a sudden on each of the four sides we have this beautiful sweep, which also noticeable from the top. You get the, because of the brushed lines and the way the brushing moves, are visible from the top. So that, compared to this, you also have dimension here on the top, but it really pulls on that crystal to give its dimension. Here, where we have just a round crystal, if we had those straight sides, you'd have maybe less feature looking top down. So, yeah. Those are the differences. What about the watches themselves? What do I like? What do I not like? What works? What doesn't? These are not traditionally styled watches at all. These are quirky and fun and different. But with that said, they wind up wearing very, very well. In particular, the Mastergraph. I have just had a really hard time getting this thing off the wrist. Because it's both, the dial on this thing, you can see those applied markers, heavily polished, tons of feature. You can see just lines everywhere, 1/10 of a second markers. You've got the feature of the espresso timer here, which can be turned. Obviously. So if you say, hey, I want a 25 to 30 second shot here on the Mastergraph, you can do that. Mastergraph, you can do that. Versus the Retrograph, which it's really set in stone. Big clicks on this 60 click unidirectional bezel. Just a pleasure to turn too. But yeah, this Mastergraph has just been a ton of fun to wear. The case finishing, obviously, anytime you've got a heavily brushed, yeah, let's not doing this thing justice. Yeah, the polishing is great. The transition, this is one of those things. The transition from brush to polished surfaces, sometimes hard to get right. He nailed it here. He nailed it. The brushed surfaces are just fun and dimensional and beautiful. Matte dial. I mean, it's just super wearable. For being a quirky little watch, so much fun to wear. And one of the few watches that people say, hey, I like that. What is that? Oh, it's a Brew Watch. It's a company out of New York. Super cool. Super cool. So, case back. One of Brew's sort of hallmarks. You've got this great case back. Yeah, 50 meters of water resistance on both of these, so they're not, perhaps your outdoor sport watch or your swimming watch. Certainly not a scuba diving watch. But I suspect you're going to have plenty of water resistance to do all the things you want to do. Not a screw down crown. Not screw down pushers for obvious reasons. Same thing, I've still got a label on this one. I don't ever pull these stickers off when people send me watches, but and for obvious reasons, this one is a little scratched. I don't believe I put those scratches there, but I don't know. These straps are fantastic. Buckle's great. It's a leather strap, guys. Change it or don't or whatever, but these are very cool. Both watches come with quick release strap changing. Same strap on both of these guys. Just a very comfortable, easy to wear. I don't think you're going to be able to get NATOs on these. I do know that the Retrograph came with a Beads of Rice bracelet at some point. I think you could probably fit that same bracelet on the Mastergraph too. So, yeah, guys, that's it. That's all I got. I'm going to leave you with that. Feel free to send us your questions and check out Brew Watches. So at Brew Watches on the Instagram, brewwatches.com. Mastergraph currently for sale, Retrograph returning soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.